All right, it's musical nozzles. I'm just going to do a quick introduction for this next module. It's been quite a popular thing over the last few years, I've noticed, with, I think it's the advent of all these $350,000 sprayers out there. Guys are really kind of interested in dribble banding now. And what we've got here is a few different demonstrations of some nozzle types that have been used over the last few years. How many of you guys have heard of Phil Needham? So I think Phil's actually a big driver behind a lot of this. He's a British fella that's now in the United States, and he's talking about intensive wheat management often. And in doing so, he's talking about tiller management. And what he really wants to do is minimize the number of tillers in a wheat crop. So there's a couple of ways that we could possibly do that. Brian Barris earlier mentioned how can we manage tillers quite easily. Did somebody say seeding rate other than Jamie? Oh, I don't have any prizes. You're out of luck. Yeah, nobody came up forward for that one. We'll have some beer after work here. So yeah, probably, and Ross likely can talk to this when he gets up here too, is seeding rate's actually a really good way of managing tillers. And for him, what he presented to us was the ideal amount of tillers is basically one per plant. So for him, he'd like to see 250 live plants with about 500 heads per square meter. For him, that's optimum. I think what Brian Barris was talking about that he's found is that likely our seeding rates need to be a little bit higher than that. And you know, a lot of the reasons that that they want to have control over the tillers so that you don't have those little small green ones that don't fill, uneven crop maturity, and you want to kind of get that best optimum yield. That's the theory anyways. And they're trying to manage tillering by doing split applications of nitrogen. So they don't want to put all of their nitrogen down at the time of seeding. They want to come in, and for him, the ideal, what he said was ideally right around jointing. So then you come in, and because I guess the crop didn't have a rich bank of nitrogen, didn't tiller out as much, then you hit it with the nitrogen with the second application, and you're supposed to fill up the heads, have optimum yield, yada yada yada. I don't personally know if this is actually true. I know that under zero tillage, we've been improving soil quality, organic matter, the soil's ability to release nitrogen. I don't know if we actually have that control up in this neck of the woods so that we can actually affect tillering using nitrogen. Regardless, I think these guys can talk to it more. Maybe there is, again, need to look into that type of research. So what guys have been doing is, you know, playing around with maybe half of the amount of nitrogen, or maybe the ideal thing is to do is go for your average yield. Check what type of year you have. You know, a year like this, you're getting a lot of moisture. You can come in with your high clearance sprayer and apply some more nitrogen, or you can broadcast too. So we've got a few plots that are going to demonstrate. Ross and the gang are going to go through it. Some of the nozzles that we demonstrated, the flat fan with liquid urea, UAN, which is 2800, actually causes a tremendous amount of leaf burn. So what they've done is gone to different streams. So John Deere's version of that has 6 streams. So they still want to get coverage across the crop, but we want to minimize the leaf burn. So now what the problem with these two types of nozzles though is that you're stuck with basically one flow rate. So if you want to adjust the rates, you'll have to do speed. The green one here is actually half as much flow as the blue one. So there's a range of nozzles available from John Deere that can match different rates that you're trying to hit. So this is what Phil Needham recommends for dribble band, and these are, I think they call them streamer bars. So we've got spacing on every 5 inches here, and it has a nice straight down stream. From what I've heard, these have less leaf burn than, say, the John Deere 6 streams. The other neat little thing they have is an adjuster, and it's going to scale from 1 to 6. So you can actually push these in and change the flow, and then you're just pouring it down. You can see I lost my pressure there. They're kind of flimsy, kind of cheap, and I've heard complaints about when you fold up your sprayer, these things all flip around and you got to get out and fix them. Oh my God, you got to get out. T-Jet has an option here. We've got 3 nozzles that spray. So again, probably a little less leaf burn than the John Deere 6 nozzles. Some people happy, some people aren't. The guys that started off with these have moved to the streamer bars, are a little bit happier. Saskatchewan has, I think, a little bit more liquid nitrogen been applied down there. This one is just a solid stream. So it would actually be on your 20-inch spacing, so kind of like a mid-row banding type effect. And then they come with different nozzle and orifices with different flows. I've heard some people say with these you get them all set because they've got a little metal orifice in the middle. You'll drive to the field and turn them on and they're all wrecked and you got to reset them. So some issues with this. Not the same type of coverage, but still a pretty simple option to throw on a sprayer.
So I guess we're at the next study, and just want to maybe kind of explain what's going on here. Ken and Brent actually put out a couple of different things. First of all, there's wheat on this side, canola here, and then canola behind you. The background nitrogen went on here for the canola with ESN, here with urea, and then the next block of wheat was with ESN. So basically, back behind me, or actually where Ray is standing, that's 120. Then back up a little bit, Ray. Vanna, sorry. 80 is the next strip, yeah. So the next strip.
There we go.
So basically, in these strips
Real,
along,
we're just not making this up.
these strips here, there's 180, sorry, 120, 80, 40, and then the back one is 0 nitrogen. And then superimposed going in this direction are the in-crop applications. So I guess the first thing, when you look at this, can you see a nitrogen response? Can you see a difference between the 0, the 40, the 80, and the 120?
So now we're telling you that urea doesn't work, okay? So you get that?
And Ray sells urea.
I don't sell anything.
Okay, you just promote it. I'm just kidding.
I think I can see it in the 120, but that's about it.
Yeah, and how uniform is this?
Not great.
No. And when you go back to the 0, and there's about, what, 8 rows there, or 6 rows?
Should be 8.
Can you see a difference within the check?
Yeah, the right 3 rows are heading before these ones, so
Yes.
maybe a little balance issue there.
So was it a balance issue? If you actually get down and walk through here, you can see that same trend all the way through. 3 rows good, 3 rows not so good.
And then earlier we dug in the ground because Ross said this looks like a phosphorus response. And so we found the leftover phosphorus particles in the ground, and it showed that the repeating pattern you're seeing is equipment related, and there was plugging on the equipment and phosphate was being placed in certain rows and not in others.
So basically, on half the side was getting phosphorus, half the side was not. So if you want to have a look at phosphorus deficiency, that's one thing you can see
So
here.
phosphorus works.
Yep, so that's number one, phosphorus does work.
And we do sell that, right?
Yeah, you sell that. And as you put on more nitrogen, actually if you do look in this strip here, it does actually look noticeably better at that 120 rate. Now this is ESN, and so the ESN works as well, Ray, so you're going to be happy about that.
Can I rub some people the wrong way too?
Well,
Phosphorus?
absolutely.
Because Friday I'm at a meeting in Killarney, Manitoba, and I'm going to show them the research we've done with phosphorus. We tried 4 different products, 620, 918.9, 1034, 1152, and it was done by the University of Manitoba. We funded the research, and Dr. Go presented it last year at the 12th International Symposium on Soil and Plant Analysis. What he found was that what he did was he applied all these products, and then he looked at the water-soluble and available phosphorus the day he applied, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and 32 days later. And ladies and gentlemen, after 4 days, it didn't make a damn difference what product you used. So all the difference that it made is one was twice as expensive than the other. So phosphorus works, but all the products are the same. I wanted to add that because some products now in the market, they say they're more available. Baloney. There you go.
Actually, Rigas summarized that up very nicely, and it's very true. You know, phosphorus is phosphorus, and a lot of people are saying, well, my product is orthophosphate. Well, so is 1151-0. So who the hell cares? So anyway, let's get back to nitrogen management. So we can see a slight increase, but the first thing we have to recognize is background soil fertility for nitrogen was probably pretty good here. Do you recall what the soil test values worked out?
It actually wasn't that high. It was only about 30 to 40 pounds of nitrogen.
Okay.
But typically we don't see a tremendous nitrogen response at this site because we have very high organic matter. It's over 4%.
And if we're going to go back...
We have low phosphorus, and we often do see response to phosphorus.
Right. So that's rule number one. Always look and see what is the history of the field. That's very, very important. And that's not uncommon to find moderate, maybe not low, but moderately low levels of nitrogen in fields. But yet sometimes they don't respond dramatically if they depend on how they've been cropped. If they've been continuously cropped, no till, odds are over the last 20 years organic matter levels have increased, and so you have a fair amount of what we call light fraction organic matter that will turn over fairly quickly and release nitrogen. So as a result, you may not always see as dramatic a response to nitrogen as what you might expect. So that's probably one thing that's going on here. Also, this land for many years controlled by the college was in alfalfa, and so keeping in mind it was in a permanent crop like alfalfa helped to contribute. The land was not cultivated, it was in a permanent crop like alfalfa, again pumping organic matter into that soil. So another reason, pardon me?
You never know, it could have been manure too.
Not sure about that one, but that's always a possibility. So that's the first issue. We're not seeing dramatic response to nitrogen. And then as we kind of move along here, there's a number of different treatments that have been put on.
Oh yeah, no one's going to read the tags for you now, huh?
Well, come on, Ray. Let's give me a hand here. That's
well, you could stand
canola.
here, look down, and then turn and tell them, right? Come on.
I'm old, and my vision's not that good anymore.
And grumpy too, so you don't want to screw with them. Okay.
Which reminds me, I haven't sent you the invoice for my research trials this year, so I better remember to do that. Thanks for reminding me.
It all depends what the results are. If I don't like the result, I'm not paying you.
I'll make them up to whatever you want.
Perfect. So. We're good. Seems to be the theme of the day.
Okay. So anyway, there's a few different things. The first one here is actually foliar applied nitrogen with fan jet nozzles at 30 kilograms per hectare. That would be about 27 pounds of nitrogen. If you look carefully, you can see the twisted leaves, and typically I would not recommend more than about 20 pounds, and not even 20 pounds on a hot day like today. You're just asking for trouble. Now, that was actually applied on the 29th of June. So that would be about, today's the 10th, 11th? And so that would be about not quite 2 weeks ago. So of that 27 pounds, about how much do you think would have actually gotten into the plant? I hear not much. How much is not much? Well, pardon me? Quarter. Okay, I hear 25%. 10%. 5. I would guess probably between 2 and 5%. You know, 5 would be the most optimistic. And so at 27 pounds, at 5%, you're probably looking at maybe 1.5 pounds. That's probably what's wound up getting into the plant. But we also see some leaf burning, and so in fact, that 1.5 pounds we might have gained, that actually might have done more harm than good in terms of the burning that's going on. Yep. Probably not. Earl, is Earl Greeno here?
No, it doesn't affect the safety.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. It'll maybe help from a volatilization standpoint, definitely, but from a safety standpoint, I really don't think it's going to have much benefit. So the question is, would 1.5 pounds per acre make a difference? Is that going to increase your yield potential? Probably not a hell of a lot. Would it increase protein? Not a chance in hell. You'd need to be putting on 30 to 40 pounds and having at least half that get into a plant to make any kind of difference in terms of actually making a contribution to protein.
Can I
Sure.
back here? Okay. Dr. Cindy Grant, who is at the Brandon Research Station, had a graduate student, Christine Rollock. They did her master's on, and you got to realize, I only speak out of data. I don't speak experiences, sorry. And what they did something really neat. They applied foliar nitrogen, and they had two sets of plots. One where they covered with plastic, and one where they did not cover with plastic. And they applied the same amount of foliar nitrogen to both. Guess where they had responses? Where they did not have the soil covered with plastic. And the conclusion was that the nitrogen, the liquid nitrogen, running down the stems with the rain, got into the soil, and that's how you get the benefit out of foliar application of nitrogen, out of what the roots pick up.
Exactly.
Not what the leaf. I mean, the leaves are not meant to be. They're not meant to be taking up nutrients. They're meant to be breathing. Okay. So now, my own research with irrigated soils using N15, which is the heavy nitrogen isotope, top dressing. The best nitrogen use efficiency you can hope for is 15%. So you put 50 pounds, you're going to see about 5.5, 4.5 being taken up.
And that's by the roots.
By the roots, absolutely. Thank you.
So maybe we'll just kind of quickly walk along here and just look at the various things that went on. But to be honest, the crop was probably not headed out when this was put on. So if we're actually going to increase yield, when would be the best time to put on this extra nitrogen, do you think? At the flag leaf stage? At heading?
Who wants that 50 bucks? Come on.
5 leaf.
There we go.
5 leaf. How many agree with Ken? So basically, just when the plant is at tillering is really, if you're going to really try to make a difference, that's probably the time to do it. Because that's really when yield potential of the crop is set for wheat and barley, for any cereal crop. The number of tillers, but really the more important, the number of potential seeds per head is actually set at that time of tillering. That's really when yield potential is set. Any nitrogen that goes on after that will maybe help to hold yield potential, but it will not increase the potential yield of the crop. And so this whole thing of main stem and tiller, that's really quite interesting stuff. And I was actually up in the Peace region last week at a winter wheat and canola tour. And one of the things that farmers up there are really trying to strive for is to have a main stem and one tiller. And they're actually going to seeding rates of 180 pounds per acre for spring wheat, but they still have the main stem and 3 tillers this year. So even going to high rates of seeding, that doesn't always mean you're going to reduce the number of tillers, because it really depends on growing conditions. Their growing conditions this spring were very good. You know, cool, moist, just ideal for tillering. And so what the plant was doing was trying to set as high a yield potential as possible, and that's just a fact of life. Now, so when we're putting these different rates of nitrogen on at this stage of the game, is that a wise thing to do in this part of the country? And certainly there's other work done, and we always want to look at other work done, whether it's Australia, the US, in Europe. But ultimately we have to go back and see what is the research telling us for our area in Western Canada, and specifically in our area of Southern Alberta. And most of the work that we've done is really showing very clearly that when you go with in-crop applications, as Rigas said, that's a very inefficient method of applying that nitrogen fertilizer. The best way to really get response is to put that fertilizer on, band it either just before or side band or mid-row apply that fertilizer at the time of seeding. Then you can get your efficiency of uptake in at 60, 70, sometimes we're even up to 80% efficiency, but you'd expect it at least to be in that 60 to 70% efficiency. So you're going to be putting on nitrogen, and you want it to be taken up efficiently. Probably the best time to put it on is really at the time of planting, and that's really the best time to do it. That's when really what's going to give you your best bang for your buck. So it kind of goes back to the last stop when I said, look at the probability. You know, do you have a high probability that product is going to work, a moderate, low, or pretty much nil? And when you go to in-crop application, you know it's at best is probably going to be a fair, a modest response at very best, and realistically, most of the time it's probably going to be low, depending on conditions. And the thing is, if you don't get any rain after you put this on, you're going to get almost no benefit. So somewhere along the way, rain is going to have to move that fertilizer that you've drill banded on or foliar applied. Rain's going to have to move it into the soil unless you have the luxury of irrigation. And that's really the downside of trying to do in-crop applications. And we can kind of go back, back in the early 90s, we worked with a machine called the spoke wheel injector. Those of you that are young, probably 25 years old or younger, that means nothing to you. But we actually had a spoke wheel injector we built at the Ag Tech Center, and we actually built 3 of them. And we did a lot of work, and we could actually get response by nesting that fertilizer at the tillering stage. We could get a response. We'd even go in later than that at the flag leaf, but we did just too much damage, that spoke wheel injector. So we could get it to work. So from an academic standpoint, it would work, but from an engineering standpoint, it was just not possible to keep that thing working and working efficiently. So it was a great idea in theory, but just didn't work out in practice. But the reality is, that's really, if we're going to try and top things up and to maintain yield and maybe build a little bit of protein, probably the time to put that fertilizer on is really at the tillering stage. Putting it on now, oftentimes is just going to be too late. And Rigas mentioned Cindy Grant. We actually had a project about 10 years ago across the prairies that I led, where we actually looked at in-crop nitrogen application, and we used, actually we even used the old 3400 and liquid fertilizer, foliar applied or sprayed on, and we actually put it on at tillering, flag leaf, and just after head emergence. And we really found, for the most part, really no benefit. Most of our benefit really came by putting all of that fertilizer on at the time of planting, not later on. So I'm actually, just from all the work we've done, that I've done here, and the work that's been done across Western Canada, my preference would be normally to put all of your fertilizer on at the time of planting. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule. If you wind up with in a spring where it's fairly dry, you cut back on your nitrogen fertilizer application, then you get some really nice rains, really improve soil moisture, and you want to go back in and do a top-up, you could go on and drill band on your liquid or broadcast on urea 4600, but you want to do it as early as you can in the growing season to get the biggest bang for your buck. The later you leave it, the less benefit you're really going to get. So you can do it, but you also have to recognize your efficiency of fertilizer uptake is really going to drop. You'd be lucky to get 40% efficiency of uptake, and realistically you're probably going to be more in that 20% efficiency of uptake. So if you put on 40 pounds, you might be lucky to get 8 pounds actually taken up, 8 to 12, somewhere in there. So I think that's maybe more than enough, but you can actually walk along here and just actually look at all the different ways of doing it. Certainly the fan, yeah, I'll get you, certainly using the fan jet, whoops, that would be this one here, the fan type nozzle really causes a lot of burn, where the other nozzles will actually give you a nice stream. You don't really see much damage until you're up to that 60 to 90 rate. So it certainly does show at 30 and even at 60, you can go in and the burning is minimal compared to using the fan jet nozzle. Yep.
I'm sort of a fan of late fall anhydrous ammonia.
And normally I am too. So I actually quite like going on with anhydrous ammonia in the fall. But we always have to recognize that if we put on our fertilizer in late fall, I would say probably 4 out of 5 years that's going to work really well. But there's probably 1 out of 5 years you're going to lose some from fall till spring. Just looking at our treatments that we put on banded last fall and how they compare to our broadcast or our banded applications or mid-row banded applications this year, they look very comparable. But looking at our exactly the same trials of wheat, barley, and canola last year, that was not the case. We lost a fair amount of nitrogen from fall till spring. Late fall applied in 2010 to spring 2011, we lost a fair amount of fertilizer. And I know other farmers, matter of fact, we had some plots at New Elm Hydro Colony last year, actually this year and last year, but they had actually anhydrous the fall of 2010, and very clearly they lost a significant amount. But that's not normal, that's not typical, but we have to recognize that sort of thing does happen every now and then. It's less frequent in southern Alberta, but moving to central Alberta it becomes more common. But like I say, probably 4 years out of 5, most of the time we can get pretty good performance by banding anhydrous ammonia or urea in late fall.
And that same year, hydrogen ammonia applied in the fall of 2010. Highest yield canola by land and highest yield of dirt came from fields where we had applied hydrogen.
Well, that's interesting. In this particular case, we had fertilizer trials in that same field, and clearly in that particular case with CDC Go Wheat, the spring applied nitrogen that was banded, it was actually banded in the side banded in the spring was by far the best. But sometimes it's kind of difficult to compare one field to the next. You want to be comparing within the same field actually, if at all possible.
High clay content soil,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just kind of telling you what we noticed from last year. So, now other comments, Ray? Sorry, Ken.
I just want to ask you a question. I guess I don't see the liquid side of this as all that novel. It's just I think that there's equipment that guys have that are doing it.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, and if you know, are there differences in efficiencies of uptake compared from the liquid to just a granular application?
I've never seen any work to show that it was an in-crop application there would be much difference. When I go back to the work we did in about 10 years ago, we did over a 3-year period across the prairies, but at that time we were comparing 3400 in a broadcast application, not urea, to the 2800, and I would venture to say the 34 would tend to work a little bit better, not a lot better though.
I'm not sure if everybody knows what UAN is, if you wouldn't mind describing that.
So when we're talking about 2800, some people refer to it as UAN. That's just an abbreviated name for urea ammonium nitrate liquid fertilizers, 2800. And so basically 2800 liquid fertilizers, that's what most people tend to use, is half urea dissolved into a liquid and half ammonium nitrate dissolved into a liquid. So that means in that 28% nitrogen, half is a urea form, a quarter of it is an ammonia form, and a quarter of it is in nitrate form. So a quarter of it is available to the plant in the nitrate form, the other 3/4 is not available and has to go through a conversion. So for example, when you do an in-crop application like this, it has to get moved into the soil. And so after, like say for example, we put this on June 29th. I can't remember when our next rain was after that. It was 4 or 5 days after that. But let's say it was July 1st. So 3 days afterwards. We get a ½ inch of rain, just enough to get that moved into the soil. How long before that fertilizer is going to be available to the plant?
Well, the nitrate's available.
So the nitrate, the quarter of it's immediately available. So if we say we put on 20 pounds, 5 pounds is immediately available. What about the other 3/4 of it? 2 to 3 weeks before most of it's going to be converted over.
And even in warm soils too?
Yep, it'll be 2 to 3 weeks before the majority of it is converted over. And it's like some is going to convert over right away, but it's slowly over time. It's going to be 3 weeks before the majority of it is actually released, typically. And you need more warm, moist soil for that to happen. If the soils are dry, it's not going to happen.
The other thing that I was going to mention is there's some people playing around with liquefied urea. And then I think also Phil had mentioned putting liquefied urea at a later stage, like past flag leaf for the protein boost.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really understand that. I don't know if you have a comment.
Yeah, I think that in that case, again, what they're really trying to do is trying to get foliar uptake. They put it on very late to try to get some foliar uptake through the leaves to try and boost protein. But reality is, you can't expect more than a very small percentage, maybe 2 to 5% to get into the leaves. But you have to remember, like Rigas said, the leaves are designed to capture the energy of the sun and to respire, take in oxygen, release carbon dioxide. That's what leaves are designed to. They're not designed to take up large amounts of nutrients. If you have a copper deficiency and you go on with a 1/4 pound of copper, you could get enough into the plant to make a difference with a micronutrient if you had a deficiency. But for nitrogen to make a difference in protein, you need a lot of nitrogen to make a difference, 1% difference in protein. So trying to do an in-crop application to bump up protein is a real challenge. And people that say they do and have success, I really kind of scratch my head.
Do you think there's differences because of the length of growing season here in Western Canada versus, say, the States?
There's very obvious differences. They have longer season varieties, and I know I used to have relatives in England. When I was over in England in 1979, the first thing I was amazed at was all the tram lines, because they would routinely broadcast 2 or 3 times nitrogen onto their wheat and barley. And the reason they would do that is that, you know, they might get 40 inches of rain during the growing season, so leaching and denitrification were issues. So they're always trying to keep their nitrogen levels up. Plus, you know, being what they got paid for wheat and barley back then, they could justify it even if the efficiencies were quite low. But their environmental conditions are much different than ours, and just from the work that we've done, for the most part, I would suggest that most of the time, putting all of your nitrogen on at the time of planting would be your best management practice, and then maybe doing some top-up more in a case of if environmental conditions have changed, then you want to maybe try and do a top dress in crop application. But that, I wouldn't recommend that as your standard practice. Now that's my personal opinion. Ray's standing there and wondering and scratching his head, and I think you've listened to me enough. Now it's time to get some opinions from a few others.
No, that was all fine. The only thing I think is missing from the split application is, you know, the nutrient stewardship of managing your nitrogen in wet situations where you may not want to put all your nitrogen down up front because it's just too wet and you risk loss. And so you might want to make a split application for that reason too. That's
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Regarding ESN. Now this year, putting the fertilizer, all the nitrogen up front with the seed or banded in the fall, it seemed like it went into an awful lot of growth. And being probably with large, you get one more rain and a lot of the crop will be down. With 20% ESN has been available later that will be utilized more in protein, would that be an advantage?
What, it's my product and I should talk? No, you talk about it. You're getting paid for this, right?
You're going to tell me the check's in the mail, right?
Checks in the mail.
To be honest, we've done a lot of work with ESN over the years.
But I'm Ukrainian, so.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember you taught me how to count in Ukrainian too. Did you hear that? Hear that? One, another one, another one, another one. Bad joke. I think I used that a couple of weeks ago, so I shouldn't use that one again. ESN is a product that I think definitely has a place. Depending on who you talk to and the kind of conditions you have, you can say, yes, this is where I might want to use it. In other cases, there might be of no benefit using it. If you're looking at trying to improve protein content, that's a product, like say for example, if you want to put on 80 pounds of nitrogen onto your spring wheat, you might decide to put on 50 pounds of urea to get that crop off to a good start, and then maybe 30 pounds of ESN that's going to release over a 60-day period in the hope that it might help to bump up some protein content. So you can certainly do it. We've actually been doing work with ESN compared to urea at 9 different locations across Alberta with wheat, barley, and canola. This is the last year for that project. We have one of the sites is just across the road behind the jail. We have them at Bow Island, Lethbridge, High River, Lacombe, Vegreville, St. Albert, and University of Alberta Farm, between Westlock and Barhead, and up in the Peace River region. So we've got a real good range of environmental conditions and soils where we're doing the work. But sometimes we get a protein kick, and sometimes we don't. And a lot of it just depends on environmental conditions. If environmental conditions allow that fertilizer to be maybe released maybe a little bit more quickly than normal, that fertilizer is going to go, the ESN will go to yield, not to protein. If you happen to have a fairly hot July, then that's actually going to reduce the yield potential of spring wheat, and some of the nitrogen has been taken up by that plant. Maybe one of the tillers might get sloughed off, maybe some of the seeds at the bottom of the head might not, or the top of the head might not fill properly. So then that protein, instead of going to yield, that nitrogen going to yield, will wind up going to increase protein. So nitrogen fertilizer will help to modify protein, but we also have to really look at what are the environmental conditions in the last 6 weeks before you're actually combining. If they're very hot and dry, you're going to lose yield potential, your protein level is going to go up. If it's wetter and cooler, that's going to give you better yield potential, but that means the higher yield potential, the more that nitrogen is going to be diluted and you're going to have lower protein content. So you can't with absolute certainty say putting on 30% of your nitrogen as ESN is always going to guarantee you higher protein content. It really depends on your environmental conditions. But it's certainly a reasonable strategy to use if you want to try and increase your protein. But really there's sort of two strategies. One, if you want to increase protein, put on more nitrogen fertilizer, and put some of it on as ESN, and that would be the strategy maybe I would use. I'd use that strategy before I would do an in-crop application, just because the fertilizer's down there near the roots, and you're going to have a much higher efficiency of uptake. But like I say, there's no guarantee in our, and that's the, if we had the same environmental conditions year after year after year, it would make it very easy to forecast and predict. But when every spring and summer is different, it makes it really hard to say definitively this is what you should do, because every year is a little different. Ray, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's why I wanted you to say it, because I worked on development of the product, and it just seems kind of, after all the discussions today, the last thing you need is to hear a guy that actually developed the product talk about the product, because you're all going to sit there wondering, is he bullshitting or is it true? So that's why Ross can do the bullshitting for me, right? And we know he doesn't, so
we will call it
it's a
adult
reasonable
education,
strategy.
actually.
It's a reasonable strategy, yes.
Well,
the
one
idea of
person
controlling
will.
these.
Any other questions?
Ross, 2800, you want to talk about nutrient analysis on that and variability with 2800? Can you tell me anything with that?
To be honest, I haven't done much testing of the 28 to kind of look at the variability. To be honest, do you want to make a comment on it?
Just, I know when we were doing the plots and stuff, we had some analysis done on it, and that there was a variability in that with percentage of nitrogen in the product, and that, so whether that had to do with your stirring of the tanks or that nature, and that you can chalk it up, but there was variability within the product. So what you're laying down may not be what you actually think.
Yeah, and that's always something to be concerned about too. With a lot of the granular products, I'm not very worried, but with the liquid, there is a little bit more potential for variability. But I really couldn't comment any more than that, though.
There's another piece to that I wanted to mention, just in case you guys are getting into this idea, is that UAN has a much higher density than water. So you can't just calibrate your sprayer with water and expect to have the same flow with UAN. It's actually like 1.3 grams per mil versus 1 for water. So there's a big flow difference if you're calibrating your sprayers.
Right. Actually, we did, like I mentioned, we did a lot of work with liquid fertilizer when we used a spoke wheel injector, and we used to have one of our applicators, our banding applicators, with a squeeze pump on it to put liquid fertilizer on too. And to be quite honest, I hated working with liquid fertilizer in small plots when you're changing rates. It's a real pain. And I prefer not to do that. The only thing I hated more was working with anhydrous ammonia, especially with the ag tech engineers. Oh, they were careless bastards. And there was anhydrous squirting all over the place. And getting squirted on with liquid is one thing, but getting anhydrous blown around all over the place, it would bring more than tears to your eyes. But
I got a question.
Sure, shoot.
We put a Viper on peas, and they had like 2 cases of UAN with the Viper to make the Viper work. Is there any response for the peas from that?
Generally, there should be no response with the 2800 and the peas. Peas are, we did a lot of work with peas a number of years ago across the province. We had many sites out, and one of the things we looked at was inoculant response and nitrogen fixation. And on average, peas fixed across all of the sites, about 60 sites we had out, they would fix 80% of their nitrogen requirements, and the other 20% would come from the soil. And so really, there was a less than 10% of the sites actually showed us some response. We did actually work with nitrogen fertilizer rates as well, and the only time we had response is if soil test levels were very low. And when we had response, that was just simply because it takes 3 to 5 weeks from the time you plant to the time the nodules are actually functioning. And if your soils are very low in nitrogen in that early growing stage, that early growth stage, vegetative stage, you might get a little bit of response to nitrogen fertilizer. But that's not very often, and typically in most cereals that have been direct seeded and continuously cropped for many years, the organic matter levels should be adequate enough to provide sufficient nitrogen until those nodules are actively functioning and fixing nitrogen. So any nitrogen you put on your peas is almost a waste, because peas are capable of doing that themselves. So at the cost of the liquid fertilizer, I'm not sure how much that would work out in terms of pounds per acre. Odds are you get very little benefit to increase crop yield.
What would be the critical levels when you apply a little bit of nitrogen?
I would say if your soil test level in the top 12 inches is less than 20 pounds, if you put a little bit of nitrogen on, like maybe 10 pounds to 15 pounds, that you might want to consider doing that. But as long as you're putting on phosphate fertilizer at 25 pounds, you're getting some of that nitrogen there already, so drilled in with the seed. So I would say typically I'd be putting on, you know, at least 25 pounds of phosphate seed place, and if you're doing that, that's going to give you 5 or 6 pounds of nitrogen anyway, so that should be adequate. So it would be an unusual situation where you actually have to put nitrogen on your peas.
And if you add some sulfur, there's a little bit in there.
That's absolutely true, but so you're using something like 210024, you're, for the amount of sulfur you're putting on, you're also putting on the same amount of nitrogen essentially. So, any other questions?
You mind if I do one more? Sorry.
Absolutely.
What do you see the potential as with the GPS guidance that we have? Like, you know, with RTK guidance, you could actually dribble band an inch beside the seed row or something like that, whatever stage it may be. Do you think that that is at all a game changer? That's something that needs to be explored at all?
Possibly on irrigation where we have really good irrigation management. If you have some eroded knolls or areas in the field that are going to be lower organic matter and more responsive to nitrogen, that's something you could consider doing. But for the average dryland farmer, it then becomes a crapshoot because you dribble that on, you need a rain to move it in. And if you do it in we know that June's our wettest month, and in this particular year it was a good month. We got lots of moisture. We go back a few years, we had some Junes where we've had almost no rain in June. So it really depends on environmental conditions after you put that on. And if you don't have much rain or hardly any rain in 10 days after you drill band that fertilizer on, odds are you're not going to get any benefit, or minimal benefit. That would be my thought.
Even if it's liquid?
Yeah, even if it's liquid, because you have to remember, you know, half of that liquid is urea, and it's going to be prone to volatilization. Even if you mix some agrotane in with it, that'll give you some protection for about a week and a half. But after that, then it's going to be subject to volatilization. So, and then for the other half, the ammonium nitrate, if you don't get rain to move it in, the roots can't tap into it. So that's really the stumbling block. So I would say, rather than trying to dribble that on and maybe only get a 20% efficiency of uptake, I put that same rate on at the time of planting. So it's there, side banded or mid-row banded for the plant to take it up. That'd be my personal thought.
The only other thing that we haven't talked about, and that has been claimed as a reason for doing it, was to minimize, I guess, shoot growth so that, you know, you can kind of manage lodging. Is there any experience with that at all?
To be honest, is almost never do we see lodging on dryland. So from a dryland perspective, I don't really see that as a potential. On the other side, trying to, you know, holding back nitrogen to reduce till rain. If it's going to reduce till rain, odds are it's probably going to minimize or potentially reduce the potential size of the head on the main stem. And so then you're actually cutting your yield potential. And that's the last thing I'd want to do. I'd rather have a main stem and 2 tillers than a main stem with reduced potential and only 1 tiller. I think you'd actually you could potentially be doing yourself a disservice.
So there's a lot of guys that are, you know, like you said, England, Australia, they're out there counting tillers and counting how many heads, and I don't know if it's just fancy math, just to, you know, what's the point? Can you actually adjust your management practices according to all of that, or?
To be honest, I think we'd be hard pressed. You know, I think it would be certainly more of an art than a science to really be trying to figure out what you're doing. And I'm cautious about something like that. Do you guys want to comment?
The discussion here revolves around the consistency of the environment. And what you're talking about, what Phil's done in different parts of the world, has been more related to more of a consistent, or we know something more about the environment and you can start to manage it. And Ross has been saying this all during the talk about nitrogen and protein and yield and all the different variables. You can do what you want to do, but at the end of the day, what happens out here pretty much swamps anything else you've done.
So say you've got that type of environment, like you said, cool conditions, lots of tillering, even though you put a high seeding rate, like I've actually experienced this on my own farm, I seed very high seeding rates. I still had tremendous amount of tillers. Does that mean I have more crop or
higher yield potential?
Higher yield potential, and maybe I should start top dressing? Can you manage it that way, looking at how many tillers?
Or you want the tillers to come through to be grain at the end of the year. Yeah, if you have the end of the year and you don't get a frost on August 13th, then you could probably do that. But how many years are you going to be able to do that? With the breeding program here, we're not breeding for, we pretty much breed for one head, right? I mean, that's
well,
survival.
pretty much you kind of assume that 50% of your yield is going to come from the main stem, and the rest of it is going to come from the first and second tiller.
And so when you talk about Phil's work in different parts of the world, look at the varieties they're growing and how the predisposition for tillers of those varieties are. I mean, I think that's what he's trying to bring back here, is something that he's learned about managing that aspect of a plant bred in a different part of the world and bringing it here and making it sound, no disrespect, really sexy, because oh my gosh, we're doing all this neat stuff. And it is neat, but I still know at the end of the day, if it doesn't rain, you're not going to see anything happen, right? So give it a shot, Ken. Do it. I mean, it makes sense, but it's the environmental variances, I think, that make a big difference.
And to be honest, that's probably the most, if I had to pick one thing that's most frustrating is doing research over the last many years, is that one year you observe something and you don't observe it again for 10 years. You know, it's so variable from year to year.
That sounds like my sex life.
I think we'll leave that alone, right?
That's on record.
That's on record.
Sorry, Ken, what did you say?
No, that's it.
He's got to beep it out again.
Last year, by accident, I found a product that will control the tillers. How many tillers you got?
Oh yeah?
Sounds exciting.
Hail?
Scissors.
Roundup.
A combination of Trexos and Pulsar at the end of the wind. 5-leaf stage. And in 2 days, man, that crop looked terrible. Phoned the rep and he came
I was
out and
wondering
scratched
what he
his
was
head
going
like
to say.
Not a burned leaves, but it grew out of it, but it stopped terrible.
Yeah. So you heard it here first. Here's a new management tool to control tillers.
Right.
One thing that I noticed, I was getting, I counted 12 tillers on
Big heads.
Yeah. And that's you kind of summed it up. If you can eliminate those tillers, then the plant pumps all its energy into that main stem, and you're going to get a good yield out of that main stem, a nice plump seed, but probably reduced yield potential.
one thing that we're not
No?
Those 2 feeds, one went 85 drylander, the one went 95.
Okay.
I sent the combine operator in, I think he's ready to go. And I said, I expect 85 bushels. He said, what? Started combining after he's on a quarter up. I asked, how's it going? He said, the moisture looks good, and would you believe the monitor says 90 bushels.
Well, Ken, I guess we got a new product to look at for next year.
You shouldn't tell that out public. You should make your own and start private label selling it and put it in the field school and get all the other guys to buy it.
And you don't need any efficacy data or
Yeah,
anything.
the government
so go
says
for
wide
it.
open. Go. It's a real scary experience.
Yeah, we kind of got that from the tone in your voice. So, any other questions, last minute questions? Then we'll turn it back to Ken.
I'm sure this is an off-label thing, right? That's, okay.
Rigas, any last minute comments you
Well,
want to
the
make?
other thing is, you know, I was just telling Ray that I spent 2 years here at the station with that time with ESO, looking at the controlled release urea product, and I did, oh my goodness,
You're wired for sound.
between here and Vauxhall, about 18 experiments under irrigation, and there were experiments that I was counting 12 tillers on wheat, and there was no yield difference between the ones that had 3. So you got to look at the genetic, you know, genetically the plant adjusts too. So Ross, so you know, like I mean, you get more tillers, that doesn't mean you're gonna get more yield either. The plant just adjusts. So anyway, I don't know why you put all this stuff on me, but that's all I have to say.
First things first, I want to thank all you guys for coming out today. You guys coming to events like this means a lot to our organization and helps keep us afloat, and it proves that the work we're doing really means a lot. I want to thank you guys again for putting up with the heat today. I know that if it wasn't for that trailer, or for that canvas on the trailer, it would probably be pretty brutal. So, also if you guys could join me in thanking everybody I work with here and all the staff and crew here. We work hard all year to try and keep the stuff going, so you could just join me. All of our sponsors, thank you. You helped drive this as well. I want to thank some of the instructor guys sitting in the back there, Ross, Rigas, Ray, as well as Ron and Michael this morning, Brian Bears, Ken, instructors providing all their knowledge today, and you guys again with the great questions. Couple more things, check us out online, farmingsmarter.com. Okay, we'll have the field school up on there. You can check out videos and stuff from today as well. Farming Smarter Conference coming up in December.
4th,
4th, 5th. Okay, it's a Medicine Hat this year, so it's far away, but book the date. We expect to see you all there. And with that, that's about it. So thank you guys once again for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you.